The massive ships hung in the darkness beyond Pluto like sleeping giants. For 3 months they had watched and studied, their sensors recording every detail of the small blue planet that orbited closer to the yellow star. Commander Zethko stood before the holographic display in his command chamber, reviewing data that flowed across the translucent screens in neat columns. 847 worlds had fallen to the Velthara Collective using these same methods. The process was always the same: observe, analyze, categorize, conquer. The beings on the third planet called themselves humans. Their world was divided into many small territories, each ruled by different groups who often fought among themselves. Perfect. Internal conflict always. It's made conquest easier. Dr. Kira pushed her glasses up her nose as she worked late in her laboratory at Seoul National University. She had no idea that invisible sensors were recording her every movement, cataloging her research on quantum particle behavior. The alien observers noted her work with the same interest they might show for a child playing with wooden blocks. Primitive science was easily suppressed when the time came. Hundreds of kilometers north, Captain Park reviewed training reports at his military base near the Korean border. His radar operators had been reporting strange atmospheric readings for weeks, but the signals were too faint to identify. Park filed the reports with growing concern, not knowing that alien computers were already analyzing his unit's response patterns and defensive capabilities. In the coastal city of Busan, Teacher Lee stood before her classroom of young students, pointing to dates on the timeline of Korean history. She spoke of invasions that had come from across the sea, of how her people had always found ways to survive. Through the classroom windows, the morning sky was clear and blue, showing no hint of the dark shapes that watched from beyond the edge of the solar system. The collective's assessment teams worked with mechanical precision. Their xenobiologists studied human physical capabilities and found them adequate for manual labor, but nothing more. Humans were strong enough to work in mines and factories, but not clever enough to pose any real threat. Their military analysts watched human armies train and fight, noting the crude chemical weapons and primitive nuclear devices. Some humans could fly metal aircraft at impressive speeds, but these machines were nothing compared to collective technology that could cross star systems in days. Most importantly, their sociologists observed human behavior during times of stress. When faced with unknown threats, humans reacted with fear and confusion. Their governments argued instead of cooperating. Their military forces fought each other instead of working together. These patterns had been seen on every conquered world. Commander Zethko received the final reports with satisfaction. The humans showed all the standard signs of a species ready for harvest. They were physically capable of useful work, technologically inferior, and psychologically predictable. Their constant wars proved they could never unite against a common enemy. The classification was official. Species 848 was suitable for integration into collective labor systems. The conquest would require 8 standard time cycles, perhaps fewer if the humans proved as weak as their initial assessments suggested. Resistance would be minimal to moderate, easily managed by standard suppression protocols. Dr. Kira continued her late-night research, unaware that her equations were being copied and analyzed by alien computers. Captain Park filed another report about unusual radar signatures, not knowing these readings came from ships larger than mountains. Teacher Lee finished her history lesson and dismissed her students. Never imagining that her world was about to become part of someone else's history, the collective had measured humanity in every way that mattered. They had counted human populations, analyzed human technology, and studied human psychology. Every measurement pointed to the same conclusion: these beings were prey, nothing more. But there was one thing the collective had never learned to measure. Properly, they could count soldiers and weapons, but they had never understood what happened when prey decided to stop running. They could analyze individual humans, but they had never seen what humans became when they worked together toward a single goal. The alien ships began moving toward Earth, their crews confident in their measurements and calculations. After all, they had never been wrong before. 847 conquered worlds proved their methods worked perfectly. What they did not know was that their presence had already been detected. Human scientists were sharing strange readings across international borders. Military commanders were quietly comparing notes about unusual atmospheric disturbances. Teachers were noticing that their students asked more questions about the stars. The collective had spent months measuring humanity. They had measured them as individuals standing alone. They had never considered what those same humans might become when they realized they were no longer alone in the universe. The dark shapes moved closer to Earth, carrying crews who believed they knew exactly what they would find. They had measured their prey carefully and found them weak. Soon they would discover that some measurements can be dangerously wrong. The hunt was about to begin. But the collective had no idea who the real hunters would be. The voice spoke in perfect Korean, so clear that President Kim thought one of her own advisors was addressing the emergency assembly. Then she heard the same words repeated in English, then Chinese, then Russian. The message was simple and terrifying. Submit to collective rule, or your species will be eliminated. Above Seoul, a ship longer than the Han River cast its shadow over the city. Similar vessels appeared over every major capital on Earth. The smaller craft moved like silver fish through the sky, and within minutes, television broadcasts went dark. Internet connections failed. Military satellites stopped responding to ground control. President Kim's hands trembled as she read the alien ultimatum to the packed assembly hall. The translator had provided the message in writing, but the words seemed impossible to believe. Serve as workers for an alien empire or watch humanity die around the world. The same scene played out in government buildings and military headquarters. In Washington, generals stared at blank screens where their communication networks had been moments before. In Beijing, party leaders argued in hushed voices about options that seemed to lead nowhere good. In London, the Prime Minister asked his advisors the same question being asked everywhere. How do we fight something like this? The initial human response was exactly what Commander Zethko had expected to see. Stock markets crashed within hours as investors panicked. Highways became parking lots as millions of people fled major cities, carrying whatever they could fit. In their cars, several small nations immediately began broadcasting surrender messages on every frequency they could access. Commander. Zethko watched the chaos from his command ship and felt the familiar satisfaction of a successful operation. Beginning. The humans were following the same pattern he had seen on hundreds of other worlds. Fear, panic, desperate attempts to negotiate, and finally, submission. It was all very predictable, but something different was happening that the collectives' computers failed to recognize as significant. At the Korea Advanced Institute of Science and Technology, student Hannah ignored her upcoming final exams and instead joined a group of professors who had been working without sleep for 36 hours. They were no longer researching theoretical physics for academic papers. They were trying to understand how alien technology worked. Within 6 hours, Hannah was part of a video conference with scientists from MIT in America, Oxford in England, and the Max Planck Institute in Germany. Researchers who had been competitors for funding just days before were now sharing their most closely guarded theories and experimental data. Sergeant June stood on his base's observation tower, but he was not watching the alien ship with fear. Instead, he was recording everything he could see. Ship movements, energy patterns, the way the smaller crafts seemed to communicate with each other. His detailed notes were being copied and sent to military analysts in countries that had been preparing for war with each other just last week. The data from Sergeant June's observations reached Colonel Smith in Colorado, General Petrov in Moscow, and Admiral Chen in Shanghai. Former enemies were now sharing intelligence about their common threat. The alien invasion had accomplished something that decades of diplomacy had failed to achieve. Engineer Min stood in his shipyard in Ulsan, staring at technical drawings that had arrived through encrypted channels from colleagues in Detroit, Hamburg, and Yokohama. The blueprints showed modifications to industrial equipment that none of them would have attempted alone. But working together, sharing knowledge across borders and languages, they were designing things that had never existed before. Dr. Kira had not slept in 2 days. She sat surrounded by equations and energy readings, trying to understand the physics behind the alien shields that protected their ships. When the breakthrough came, it was so simple, she almost missed it. The shields operated on harmonic frequencies that could be disrupted using basic acoustic principles. Her discovery was encrypted and transmitted to research facilities around the world within 12 hours. Scientists in India, Brazil, Australia, and South Africa began building equipment based on her calculations. The knowledge spread like wildfire through networks that had been established overnight. The collective's computers recorded all of this activity, but their programs categorized it as typical pre-conquest behavior. The xenopsychologists who studied the data were amused rather than concerned. Humans were attempting to cooperate, just as many species did when faced with superior technology. It never worked. What the collective failed to understand was that no species in their experience had ever possessed humanity's ability to learn and adapt under extreme pressure. Their databases contained information about species that fought bravely, species that surrendered quickly, and species that tried to negotiate. But they had never encountered a species that could evolve its technology and tactics in real time. Student Hannah was now working with theoretical frameworks that had been developed on 6 different continents. Sergeant June's observations were being analyzed by military strategists who had been enemies 72 hours earlier. Engineer Min was building devices that combined industrial knowledge from around the world. Dr. Kira's frequency calculations were being tested in laboratories that spanned 12 time zones. Humans who had never met were working together with a coordination that impressed even their own leaders. The collective had measured humanity's technology, military capability, and social structure. But they had failed to measure something that only appeared when humans were pushed to their absolute limit, their ability. To become something entirely new, the invasion was proceeding exactly as planned, but the prey was evolving faster than the predators had ever imagined possible. Commander Zethko stared at the reports on his screen and felt something he had never experienced in 800 conquests: confusion. 6 months had passed since the invasion began, and the humans should have surrendered by now. Instead, his casualty reports were growing longer each day. The first incident had seemed like a lucky accident. Patrol Ship 7 had been conducting routine surveillance over the Korean mountains when it simply vanished from all sensors. The search teams found pieces of metal scattered across 3 valleys, but the damage patterns made no sense. The security recordings from the ship's final moments showed something impossible. Human aircraft had attacked using weapons that glowed with the same energy signatures as collective technology. But humans did not possess such weapons. Their most advanced missiles could barely scratch collective armor. Pilot Seok had planned the attack for 3 weeks. His squadron of modified aircraft carried mining lasers that had been retrofitted with equipment based on Dr. Kira's frequency calculations. They had studied collective flight patterns, timing their movements, and mapping their patrol routes. When they struck, it was with precision that surprised even themselves. The alien ship had been destroyed in less than 30 seconds. The humans had learned to use the collective's own shield frequencies against them, turning their greatest defense into a weakness. But more importantly, they had learned to work as a coordinated unit in ways that impressed their former enemies. The second shock came when the humans stopped running and started hunting. Lieutenant Yoon led her special operations team through the ruins of downtown Seoul, but they were not hiding from the alien patrols. They were tracking them. Her soldiers carried equipment that looked like a mixture of human engineering and alien technology. Devices that seemed to improve after every mission. Each time Yoon's team engaged collective forces, they learned something new. They studied alien weapon signatures, analyzed their communication patterns, and tested different tactics. Every failure taught them how to succeed the next time. The collective commanders began to notice that human attacks were becoming more sophisticated. The weapons were more effective, the tactics more precise, and the coordination between different human units was improving at an alarming rate. Engineer Min no longer worked in a simple shipyard. His facility in Ulsan had become something that did not exist in collective databases, a hybrid technology laboratory. Captured alien components were brought there from around the world, studied, understood, and incorporated into human weapons within days. Min's team included specialists from every continent. They shared information through networks that the collective could not intercept using quantum encryption methods that were more advanced than anything in alien databases. Human innovation was combining with captured alien technology to produce weapons that neither species could have created alone. But the third shock was the most disturbing of all. Dr. Song had been a language professor before the invasion. She led teams that studied captured collective soldiers with the same clinical methods that aliens had once used on humans. She dissected their psychology, analyzed their social structures, and mapped their technological dependencies. The humans were no longer just defending their world. They were learning to understand their enemies better than the enemies understood themselves. Dr. Song's reports contained details about collective weaknesses that even Zethko had not considered. Commander Zethko reviewed the intelligence summaries with growing alarm. The humans had cataloged every aspect of collective society, their military hierarchy, their technological limitations, their psychological fears. They understood how collective ships communicated, how their weapons systems operated, and how their command structure made decisions. Most terrifying of all, the humans were using this knowledge effectively. They targeted collective supply lines with surgical precision. They exploited weaknesses in alien technology that the collective had not even known existed. They predicted collective military responses with accuracy that bordered on the supernatural. But the final revelation came when human forces began broadcasting messages in perfect Velthera language. Not just simple words, but complex analyses of collective military doctrine. Detailed critiques of their tactical decisions, psychological warfare that targeted specific fears unique to alien culture. The humans had learned to think like their enemies, but they had done something the collective had never achieved. They had learned to think better than their enemies. The intercepted communications showed human military leaders discussing collective operations with the same casual expertise that Zethko's own officers used. They predicted alien movements, exploited alien weaknesses, and coordinated their responses with a precision that surpassed anything in collective databases. Lieutenant Yoon's team was now hunting collective patrols with weapons that were superior to anything the aliens carried. Engineer Min's laboratory was producing technology that improved on alien designs. Dr. Song's analysis teams understood collective psychology better than collective psychologists. Commander Zethko realized that something fundamental had changed in the war. The humans were no longer the prey being hunted. They had become the hunters. They were learning faster than their former predators had ever thought possible. The species that had been measured as primitive, predictable, had evolved into something that no collective database could categorize. They had been prey for exactly 6 months. Now they were something entirely new. And they were winning. 18 months had passed since the first alien ships appeared over Earth. And Commander Zethko no longer recognized the war he was fighting. The reports crossing his desk described battles that followed no patterns from the collective's vast database of conquered worlds. Dr. Kira stood in a command center that had not existed a year ago. Of computers hummed around her, processing data through communication systems that moved information faster than light itself. These systems had been built from captured alien technology. The humans had improved them in ways that even surprised their creators. She spoke to scientists in laboratories across the globe as easily as if they were in the same room. A physicist in Tokyo shared breakthrough data with researchers in London, Berlin, and São Paulo simultaneously. The network that connected human scientists was now more advanced than anything the collective possessed. Captain Park climbed aboard his flagship, a vessel that would have been impossible to build just 2 years ago. The ship's hull was human-designed, but its engines were based on alien technology that had been captured, studied, and improved. His crew operated weapons that combined the best innovations from both species. The ship moved through space with a grace that impressed even veteran collective pilots. Park's fleet used tactics that seemed to predict alien movements before they happened. Human commanders were no longer reacting to collective strategies. They were staying 3 steps ahead of them. But what truly disturbed Commander Zethko was how deeply the humans had learned to understand their enemies. specialist. An worked in a facility that looked more like a university than a military base. Her team studied captured alien personnel with the same scientific methods that universities had once used to study ancient cultures. They analyzed collective social structures, communication patterns, and psychological responses with academic precision. An's psychological warfare broadcasts were targeted with surgical accuracy. She knew which alien commanders feared failure, which ones craved recognition, and which ones could be turned against their own forces. Her operations disrupted collective morale more effectively than any weapon. Human strike teams no longer simply attacked alien positions. They studied them first, cataloged their weaknesses, and then dismantled them with methodical efficiency. Each operation was planned with the same care that scientists use to design experiments. The balance of power shifted completely when programmer Young's computers began predicting collective behavior with frightening accuracy. His algorithms analyzed thousands of alien tactical decisions and found patterns that even the aliens themselves had not noticed. Young's systems could predict with 8–9% accuracy what the collective would do in any given situation. Human forces began positioning themselves to counter alien moves before those moves were even made. The hunters had become the hunted. Teacher Lee no longer stood before a classroom of children. Instead, she briefed military commanders on the cultural weaknesses she had identified in collective society. Her background in human history had given her insights into how civilizations could be disrupted from within. Lee's analysis helped human forces target the alien command structure with precision that bordered on surgical. She identified which alien leaders were vulnerable to pressure, which communication channels were most critical, and which cultural symbols could be used to create fear and confusion. Engineer, Min's shipyard had evolved into something that defied easy description. His teams created weapons that were neither fully human nor fully alien, but something entirely new. They took the best ideas from both species and combined them in ways that produced results superior to anything either could achieve alone. The hybrid technology flowing from Min's facility was so advanced that even the collective's most experienced engineers struggled to understand how it worked. Human innovation had merged with alien science to create something unprecedented. Student Hana worked alongside teams that dissected collective society with the same thoroughness that medical students use to study anatomy. But they understood alien hierarchies better than many aliens did, mapped their motivational systems, and identified psychological pressure points that could be exploited. Dr. Song's xenobiology division had become the galaxy's leading authority on collective culture. Their reports contained insights that would have impressed the aliens' own sociologists. They knew how collective commanders thought, what they feared, and how they could be manipulated. As victory reports flooded in from battles across multiple star systems, Commander Zethko felt something he had never experienced in 847 conquests: genuine fear. The humans were not just winning individual battles. They were winning the war in ways that seemed impossible. The species that had been cataloged as primitive apex predators 18 months ago was now outfighting, outthinking, and outmaneuvering the galaxy's most successful conquerors. Had learned everything the collective knew and had improved upon it. Commander Zethko realized with growing horror that his species had made a fundamental error in their initial assessment. They had measured humanity during peacetime, when humans were divided and fighting among themselves. They had assumed this was humanity at its peak capability, but humans under pressure. Humans working together toward a common goal. Humans who had been given advanced technology to study and improve upon. This was something entirely different. This was something that had never existed in the galaxy before. The collective had awakened something that they were completely unprepared to face. They were about to learn that their measurements had been catastrophically wrong. The war ended. On a Tuesday morning, when the last collective ship disappeared beyond the edge of the solar system, there was no surrender ceremony, no signed treaty, no final battle. The aliens simply left, and humanity found itself alone again for the first time in 2 years. Admiral Park stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the alien retreat through sensors that had been impossible to imagine 3 years ago. His fleet of hybrid ships moved in perfect formation, their crews ready to pursue the fleeing enemy. But the pursuit was unnecessary. The collective was running, and they would not be back. Dr. Kira received the confirmation from tracking stations around the globe. The alien ships were accelerating toward deep space at maximum speed, abandoning equipment and personnel in their haste to escape. The global research network she had built was now tracking their retreat with the same precision they had once used to hunt human ships. The final transmission from Commander Zethko was broadcast on all frequencies, as if he wanted every human to hear his words. His voice carried the weight of defeat and something that sounded almost like respect. "We measured them as prey and planned to harvest them," he said in perfect English. "They measured us as teachers and learned everything we knew. They measured our weaknesses and exploited them with ruthless efficiency. They measured our fear and used it as a weapon against us." The transmission continued as collective ships vanished one by one from human sensors. "We came to their world to take measurements. For cages, they took measurements for graves." In the months that followed, humanity discovered that victory brought responsibilities they had never imagined. Engineer Min's hybrid technologies were revolutionizing human industry, producing energy systems and manufacturing processes that made old factories look like stone tools. His workshops were designing ships that could cross between stars as easily as jets had once crossed oceans. Dr. Song's xenobiological research had opened entirely new fields of science. Her teams understood alien psychology and culture better than the aliens themselves. Universities around the world established new departments dedicated to studying the dozens of alien species that made up the collective. Humanity had become the galaxy's leading experts on alien behavior. Student Hannah was no longer a student. Dr. Hannah now led humanity's first missions beyond the solar system, commanding ships that carried both human crews and advanced technology that amazed even their creators. Her expeditions were making contact with alien civilizations that had never heard of either humans or the collective. The collective xenobiologists filed their final report on humanity from a safe distance of several star systems. The classification that had once read primitive apex predators, suitable for labor extraction, now carried a warning that had never been issued in collective history. Species 848, adaptive apex predators. Extreme caution required. Recommend complete avoidance. It was the first time the collective had ever retreated from a species they had intended to conquer. The report would be studied by alien strategists for generations, trying to understand how such a catastrophic failure had occurred. Teacher Lee returned to her classroom in Busan, but her lessons had changed completely. She no longer taught her students about invasions that had come from across the sea. Instead, she taught them about the day humanity discovered it had never been prey at all. Her students learned about the scientists who had shared knowledge across enemy borders, the soldiers who had studied their enemies with academic precision, and the engineers who had built impossible things by working together. They learned that humanity's greatest strength was not any individual talent, but their ability to become something entirely new when circumstances demanded it. Pilot COK commanded the first human ships to leave the solar system permanently. His mission was not conquest but protection. Earth had become a beacon for smaller alien civilizations that sought freedom from the collective's rule. Humanity was no longer hiding from galactic powers. It had become one. Other alien civilizations watched humanity's rise with emotions that ranged from admiration to terror. They conducted their own careful studies of human capabilities, but these measurements were taken with respect rather than the arrogance the collective had shown. No one wanted to repeat the collective's mistakes. The galaxy had learned that humans were dangerous not because they were violent, but because they were adaptable. They could learn faster than their enemies expected, cooperate more effectively than anyone predicted, and evolve their capabilities in real time. They had transformed from prey to predator in less than 2 years. The Velthera collective retreated to the far edges of their territory, nursing wounds that were more psychological than physical. They had lost more than a war. They had lost their certainty about their place in the galaxy. For the first time in their history, they had encountered a species that was better at being them than they were. The ashes that drifted through space were not the remains of a conquered Earth, but the scattered pieces of collective assumptions about what made a species strong. They had measured humanity at its weakest point and assumed that was its maximum potential. In the end, humanity's victory was not just military, it was evolutionary. They had been measured as prey and had proven themselves to be something the galaxy had never seen before, a species that could become whatever they needed to be. The measurement had been wrong, and the entire galaxy would remember the cost of that mistake.